we're going to talk about the standard form of an equation. The standard form of a linear equation is the equation in the form ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are real numbers, and a and b are not both 0, and a is greater than 0. So if we're looking at this, it might be something like 3x plus 4y equals 12. So you're going to have a whole number or of some variety, can also be an integer, in front of x. You're going to have another number in front of the y, and then your c just represents a number all by itself. Very important concept number 1. You need to know you can find your x and y intercepts very quickly from this form, and then you can use it to create graphs. So if we have this, something in standard form, ax plus by equals c, we can find both our x and our y intercept. How do we find our x and our y intercept, you ask? Very simply. So let's practice that. So if we want to find our x-intercept, we're going to replace our y value for 0. Why would we do that? Well, because when you replace your y value with 0, this whole part becomes 0. So let's look at this first one. I have the equation 3x plus 4y equals 8. So now I want to find my x-intercept. So I'm going to take out that y and put 0. So here I have 4 times 0, which just equals 0. So now I have a new equation, which is 3x equals 8. Here's a simple one-step equation that we're going to solve. 3x equals 8. We divide both sides by 3, so we find that x is equal to 8/3. So we could say that our intercepts of this equation, our x-intercept I should say, is 8/3, which is like 2 2/3, and 0. Why is it 0? Because y is 0, x is this. Remember, we are looking for our x-intercept. In other words, where on the x-axis it crosses. If it's on the x-axis, then your y value is going to be 0. Consequently, the same thing happens over here. If we are looking for our y-intercept, we put a 0 in for x. Why is that? Because then we're on this same thing, and we're looking for something that lies on the y-axis. If it's on the y-axis, then your x value is going to be 0, because it doesn't go over left or right. So here, if I plug in 0 for x, I get 3 times 0, or 0, which makes my equation just 4y equals 8. 4y equals 8, we divide both sides by 4, we find out that y is equal to 2. So my y-intercept in this case would be 0, 2. So if this is my equation, my y-intercept is going to be up here at 0, 2, while my x-intercept is somewhere over here. Let's look at another one. 4x minus 9y equals 12. So if I plug in 0 for y, I get 4x equals 12. Divide both sides by 4, I find that x equals 3. So my x-intercept comes out to be 3, 0. In other words, it crosses the x-axis at 3. If I plug in 0 for my x-intercept and solve for y, make sure you don't drop your negative, because all I do is take away this. That leaves you with a negative 9y. Divide both sides by negative 9. This becomes negative 4/3. So my y-intercept would be 0, negative 4/3. It is very important that you realize that an intercept on this axis is written as an ordered pair. And if it's an intercept, one or the other will always be 0, because you should know at this point anything that lies either on the x-axis, on the x-axis or the y-axis is going to have a 0 for part of it. So how do we graph it? Well, let's try it. So here, we're going to start with this equation. 2x plus 3y equals 12. We already know how to find the x and y intercepts by plugging in a 0. So if I plug in a 0 for y, I find my x-intercept to be 6, 0. If I plug in a 0 for x, I find my y-intercept to be 0, 4. So now I go over here to my x and my y-axis. I'm going to take my x-intercept and I'm going to mark it. So I went over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Over 6, I'm not going up or down at all, so I put a dot at 6, 0. Then I take my y-intercept. I didn't go over at all because my x was 0, but I went up 4 and put a dot there. Then all I have left to do is simply connect them. So from this one equation, I solve for my intercepts and I'm able to graph my line. This is without rearranging it into slope-intercept form and without looking for my slope. That's not to be said that I can't take this and find my slope, but we don't have to in this instance. Let's do another one. 5x plus 2y equals negative 10. Be careful of negatives. Plug in a 0 for that y so that you find your x-intercept to be negative 2, 0. Plug in a 0 for the x and find your y-intercept, I hope you can see this, to be 0, negative 5. So when I put those on my graph, you find that it is over here. Same thing. Plot the points, draw your line. Okay? What if we have horizontal and vertical lines? Hopefully you remember this from last year. If it's horizontal, we have no slope or 0 slope. If it's vertical, we have an undefined slope. So if we say we're going to graph y equals negative 3, this is really what our equation looks like. 0x plus 1y equals negative 3. So we don't need to plug in a 0 for x to find our y-intercept because we already have it. There's no work required at y equals 3. So what you need to do is simply look on here and go to where y equals negative 3 and draw a line straight across. And that means for any value of x you pick, y equals negative 3. Okay, the same works for a vertical line. Here's your equation, what you're really representing, 1x plus 0y equals 2. Obviously, you can throw away the 0y, and you don't really need to write the 1, as we all know. So what you're saying is that for every y value, x equals 2. So if x equals 2, you draw a straight line up and down going through the 2 on the x-axis. So when y equals something, it's going straight across horizontally through that value on the y-axis. If x is equal to something, it's going straight up and down vertically through that number on the x-axis. Okay, so let's look at one more thing while we're still on this topic of standard form. What if our equation is in y equals mx plus b, and we need to get to standard form? We can still do that. Sometimes we've got to be able to go back and forth. So let's say we had 3/4 x plus 2, which you know, here's your slope, your y-intercept, but we need to get back to our ax plus by equals c, or standard form. So how do we do it? Well, first we're going to multiply and get rid of our fractions. So we have a 4 down here, so we've got to multiply everything in here by 4. So I multiply by y by 4, I get 4y. When I multiply 3/4 by 4, that 4 disappears, leaving me with 3x. 2 times 4 gives me 8. That is where this equation came from. I distributed my 4 all the way across. Now I've got to keep solving. Remember, I want it to look like this, with the x value in the front, the number standing alone. So I'm trying to get the 8 by itself, everything else on the left-hand side. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. That gives me my 8 all by itself. So at this point, what I actually have is negative 3x plus 4y equals 8. I'm almost there, but I really don't want a negative a value. Remember, a. So negative 3 is my a value. So we have two things we can do. We can multiply by negative 1, or we could divide by negative 1, because you're getting the same result either way. So I'm going to multiply my entire equation by negative 1, because keep in mind, it's got to kiss. This mama has to kiss all of her babies. So it's going to change the sign on every value within those parentheses. So this now becomes 3x minus 4y equals negative 8. So I now have a positive a. I do have a negative here, but of course we know that this is the same as plus negative 4y. And that's okay, because this says plus, and really, here's plus negative, but we can write it as minus. Alright, so let's look at one more before we're done. If y equals negative 2/5 x plus 1. Once again, get rid of your fraction. So multiply by 5. 5 multiplied by 5, y multiplied by 5 gives you 5y. When you multiply everything else, this 5 disappears. 1 times 5 is just 5. Now, remember, we want to isolate that 5 and move our x's and y's to the other side. So I add 2x to both sides. Fortunately, this time it comes out positive. So I get 2x plus 5y equals 5. I don't need to multiply by negative 1 at the end because I have a positive a value. So this would be your final answer in this case. And that is how you deal with standard form.